discuss the sexual ethics policy with the Texas Annual Conference Administration under the United Methodist denomination in Houston, Texas. My husband was off the past 3 days. He works a rotating schedule, and so we are usually pretty busy, and our schedule is pretty hectic on those days. And today I am tired, but I wanted to do this because this is important to me. And the policies, the sexual ethics policy, or lack of sexual ethics policy of the Texas Annual Conference, it's important to me to cover that and to point out the inconsistencies and share stories of when I was growing up within the administration and how careless people within the administration of the Texas Annual Conference are with their policies. So this is going to be part of the appendix, and I'm reading off of the last of page 14, and then I will be covering page 15. Mental health services provider means an individual licensed or unlicensed who performs or purports to perform mental health services, including this is going to be A through H. All right. A, licensed social worker defined by Section 504.002 Occupations Code. B, chemical dependency counselor as defined by Section 504.001 Occupations Code. C, licensed professional counselor as defined by Section 503.002 Occupations Code. D, licensed marriage and family therapist as defined by Section 502.002 Occupations Code. E, member of the clergy. F, physician who is practicing medicine as defined by Section 151.002 Occupations Code. G, psychologist offering psychological services as defined by Section 501.003 Occupations Code. Or H, special officer for mental health assignment certified under Section 1701.404 Occupations Code. 3, patient means an individual who seeks or obtains mental health services. The term includes a person who has contact with a special officer for mental health assignment because of circumstances relating to the person's mental health. Sexual contact means A, deviate sexual intercourse as defined by Section 21.01 Penal Code. B, sexual contact as defined by Section 21.01 Penal Code. C, sexual intercourse as defined by Section 21.01 Penal Code. Or requests by the mental health services provider for conduct described by paragraph A, B, or C. Sexual contact does not include conduct described by paragraph A or B that is a part of a professional recognized medical treatment of a patient. 5, sexual exploitation means a pattern, practice, or scheme of conduct which may include sexual contact that can reasonably be construed as being for the purposes of sexual arousal or gratification or sexual abuse of any person. The term does not include obtaining information about a patient's sexual history within standard accepted practice while treating a sexual or marital dysfunction. Okay. This is 6. Therapeutic deception means representation by a mental health services provider that sexual contact with or sexual exploitation by the mental health services provider is consistent with or a part of a patient's former patients or former patient treatment. 7. Mental health services, as defined in this by this section, provided by a member of the clergy, does not include religious, moral, and spiritual counseling, teaching, and instruction. Okay. Added by Acts 1993, 73rd legislation. Okay. Section 81.002, sexual exploitation cause of action. A mental health services provider is liable to a patient or former patient of the mental health services provider for damages for sexual exploitation if the patient or former patient suffers directly or indirectly a physical, mental, or emotional injury caused by, resulting from, or arising out of sexual contact between the patient or former patient and the mental health services provider. 2, sexual exploitation of the patient or former patient by the mental health services provider. Or 3, therapeutic deception of the patient or former patient by the mental health services provider. Okay, I wanted to talk about sexual exploitation. And having been a survivor of sexual assault by a United Methodist minister and being followed to the restroom by people with the domestic relations office, when some of them didn't have name tags, we didn't even know their name, and being followed to the restroom by people who work for the domestic relations office, and we don't know who they are, we don't know their name, and they're standing outside of the stall listening to us urinate or have a bowel movement on the toilet. As a sexual assault survivor from a United Methodist minister that was employed under the Texas Annual Conference, the same administration that is over St. Stephen's United Methodist Church, that provides their church for supervised visitation, being followed to the restroom, being a survivor of sexual assault is triggering. And it is exploitation. I don't have a criminal record, and I was one of many parents that were forced into the supervised visitation by an abusive ex-spouse. And I met a teacher in there. He had to take a loan out against his car and his house. He took out a $15,000 loan so that he could have a jury trial, so that he could get out of the supervised visitation. He was a school teacher. In order to be a school teacher, you cannot have a criminal record. And he was forced into the supervised visitation with the Domestic Relations Office. I met another woman who was a registered nurse with Texas Children's Hospital. And she had also worked in pediatric psychiatric units. She had worked as a charge nurse, and she had to visit her daughters in supervised visitation. And it goes against the policy of it goes against the sexual ethics policy of the Texas Annual Conference. And the mental health services, first of all, I did in the past, but now there is absolutely no way that I would ever go to a pastor for mental health counseling. If my husband and I had to go and see a marriage counselor, we would never go, excuse me, my husband and I would never go consult with a pastor for marriage counseling, ever. If I were going to go talk to a therapist for mental health treatment, first of all, it would be hard to find the right therapist for me because I've been through so much trauma. So I could go to a therapist that has an LPC, and chances are she would tell me, I cannot continue to see you. You need to see a therapist who is trained in complex trauma, because I cannot just go and see a therapist who may have a minimum of a LPC. Thanks to the Texas Annual Conference, because I have been exposed to so much trauma. The type of therapy that I would need to go and see a psychologist that is trained in complex trauma, or a psychologist that is trained in complex trauma and EMDR therapy. And the problem with that is that a lot of those are not covered under health insurance. And I also wanted to talk about the reality, and as I said, the reality of parents who are in the supervised visitation. A lot of them are forced into it because they have an abusive ex-spouse. And there is a term called legal abuse. That is what I have been through. And that is how my ex-husband was able to get custody of our kids. And usually, if they can find a judge that is more partial to women or men, and the judge that we had to go before was more partial to men, even if they were a danger to the children. And I had evidence of child abuse. So now the situation we're in is that our 16-year-old has repeatedly said that he wants his 10-year-old brother to die a slow and painful death. And Carly Anthony refuses to provide our 16-year-old with psychiatric treatment. And so with the supervised visitation, basically, documents are falsified to put you in there. The supervised visitation, I was kicked out of the supervised visitation because I exposed the fact that they were involved with the Texas conference, and because the Texas conference had a history of employing child molesters, and one of their clergy was sentenced to 55 years in prison for brutally beating his wife in a United Methodist parsonage at a church that was under the Texas Annual Conference administration, because Michael Tabb had been placed on assignment there. And what the Texas Annual Conference doesn't understand is that there was a parent who showed up at the supervised visitation at St. Stephen's with a weapon. And he was allowed to come back. There should have been a zero tolerance, and there wasn't. In fact, there was a big sign on the glass door that you were not allowed to bring weapons to that church at St. Stephen's United Methodist Church. And I contacted the conference administration, but they could care less. And so the domestic relations office retaliated, and they told me that I could not come back since I wasn't happy. I guess I'm supposed to be happy being sexually harassed in front of my sons. But, I think that's disgusting. And I don't think that my sons deserved that, even if the Texas Annual Conference may have felt that they did because they had me for a mother. And not only was I exploited by being sexually harassed in front of my sons were exploited by having to witness that. And there is law enforcement there. You go through a bag search when you come in. I was afraid for my safety. And one of the parents, I had actually tried to go to the media. And Shane, the guy that kept hitting on me, he told the domestic relations office employees that I was going to the media about their involvement with the Texas Annual Conference. And the reason why he did that, he was retaliating against me because I was not sexually interested in him. And so he was retaliating. because I was not interested. That put me in a dangerous situation. They did not retaliate against me because they knew that if they did, that it could end up in the media. But they didn't retaliate because they were probably nervous. And the media would not take my story because I did not have an attorney representing me, because I could not afford it. The supervised visitation does financial damage to the parents involved, because it is presumed that they are child abusers, even if they aren't, even if there's no history of arrest and there's no criminal conviction. Because if there was, they wouldn't even be at the supervised visitation. They would be incarcerated or out on bond. And so there was one time when I was threatened by a police officer at the supervised visitation. And this was during the pandemic. We were not allowed to take our phone to the restroom. I did not want to leave my phone unattended. And I was threatened. And I was told, and I was threatened in front of our sons. And I was told if I touched my phone, there would be consequences. Meaning, if I touched my phone, I was going to be arrested. If I had touched my phone, I would not have been breaking a law. And so I left my phone there. And during that time, that same police officer, even before that, was sitting there at the supervised visitation watching me. Now, this was in the federal building during the pandemic. However, what the Texas Annual Conference doesn't understand is that what happened to me could also happen at one of the United Methodist churches. If anyone in the domestic relations office decides to target you, if you are placed in the supervised visitation based on false accusations without due process, which is what happened to me, and there are no criminal charges filed, there are no police reports filed, there's no history of arrest, there is no past criminal record. If in the event they decide to target you, they can place you under arrest during that visitation, and they can jot down anything they want on paper, and no one is going to question it because you're in supervised visitation. You are placed on arrest in supervised visitation, and it doesn't matter if it was justified or not. People are going to assume it was justified because you were placed in supervised visitation. And the Domestic Relations Office of Harris County could care less about protecting children in the family court system, because if they did, then they would not have kicked me out simply because I was exposing the fact that they were involved with a large administration that had a history of employing child molesters. That is the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church in Houston, Texas. I did not feel safe walking in there. And I did eventually figure out how to order cameras that I could wear in that visitation, because I tried to take notes with a crayon, and Pornhay stopped me and threw away the piece of paper. I did get video. I have put some of it out on social media, and I am the only one who has video of those visitations. Why would I be the only one who has video of those visitations? Because when those visitations take place, there is no audio or video surveillance. The Domestic Relations Office only called me when they were kicking me out. They did not email me. They did not mail me a letter. They apparently, Carl Edward Anthony said they mailed him a letter, but they never mailed me anything. And it's because they don't want to leave a paper trail. Nothing was filed in court. Because if anything had been filed in court, I would have been notified. There should have been a hearing. There wasn't. That is how the Domestic Relations Office works. And any parent that is in there is vulnerable to being targeted within the Domestic Relations Office, either through sexual harassment or being placed under arrest under false pretenses. And no one will ask any questions. And it is that type of corruption. The Texas Annual Conference is involved with the Domestic Relations Office. Despite that type of corruption, despite the corruption that the Domestic Relations Office of Harris County is involved in. And it makes sense because the Texas Annual Conference had no interest in informing the Domestic Relations Office. Well, sure, you can use our churches for visitation sites, but we've had multiple clergy that have been convicted of crimes, from murder to sexual assault of a child to wire fraud. No, they didn't tell them that. And any time that those news stories those clergy have been in the news, there's never been news coverage about the common denominator of those 3 clergy that were convicted of sexual assault of a minor and murder and financial fraud. And the common denominator of those 3 clergy, Kendall Graham, Michael Tabb, and Kirby John Caldwell, the common denominator of all 3 of those is that all 3 of them were employed under the Texas Annual Conference administration in Houston, Texas. And they were placed on assignment at those churches. In the news media, I'm trying to think. I'm sorry. I am tired, and so I have brain fog. I can't think of the church that Kirby John Caldwell was pastor of. It was called a mega church. It is not a mega church. The reason why it is not a mega church is because it is under the Texas Annual Conference administration. A mega church stands alone. It is not a part of it is self-governing. And there's no way that Windsor Village could be considered a mega church because it is under the Texas Annual Conference administration. Now, there has been talk of Windsor Village separating from the Texas Annual Conference. However, this would not be good for the Texas Annual Conference. And there's benefits to Windsor Village being under a large administration. Because if anyone sued the church, they have backing and support from the conference administration. And if anyone wanted to sue someone on staff at Windsor Village, they would have to file a lawsuit against the conference administration. And so that provides support rather than if Windsor Village was not under the Texas Annual Conference administration. It would not be good for the Texas Annual Conference if Windsor Village separated from them because it would be loss of revenue. Because these churches pay in apportionments, which is just another word for tithe, every year. And that is income and revenue for the Texas Annual Conference administration. That would be a big financial loss if Windsor Village separated. And so I also wanted to say that when the Domestic Relations Office was using a federal building in downtown Houston, we had to park in downtown Houston, but we did not have to pay for parking. Someone is funding these visitations. What this means is that someone is funding visitations and making it possible for parents that have been accused of either child abuse or domestic violence and forced into the supervised visitation based on false accusations. Someone is funding this. And someone was paying for the parents to be able to park for free in downtown Houston to visit their kids that they've been accused of not being safe enough for their kids to be around. Who would want to pay for that? My theory is that I'm alleging that the Texas Annual Conference is involved in that. And I'm alleging that the Texas Annual Conference could probably afford to provide as many visitation sites as possible with their churches for the Domestic Relations Office, as many visitation sites as needed free of charge without charging the domestic relations office rent. And not only can they do that, but they can also pay for these parents to visit their kids. I don't know that they're doing that. I haven't seen proof. But it's not impossible. And it wouldn't be surprising for me to think of that, knowing that I had to visit my sons at a United Methodist Church that was under the Texas Annual Conference Administration, where I was followed to the restroom. Nothing surprises me anymore about them. Oh, and by the way, there were times when I had to go to the restroom and I couldn't take my glasses off, or I had a watch that had a camera too, and I couldn't take it off because I tried once and I dropped it and broke the watch. So I would have to go to the restroom with the camera on because I was afraid that I would be in danger once they found out I had walked in there with cameras. So I got video and sound from me having a bowel movement on the toilet. So since the Texas Annual Conference knows that employees from the Domestic Relations Office go and follow the parents into the restroom and listen to them urinate or have a bowel movement on the toilet. And, who knows if these domestic relations office employees are getting video of that or recording that in the restrooms, because there's no audio or video surveillance. Would the Texas Annual Conference like those videos where I'm on the toilet in the bathroom, since they felt it was appropriate to allow a sexual assault survivor from one of their clergy to be exploited? Would you like one of those videos? That's all I have.